Late one night, I could clearly hear my roommate's closet door opening and slamming shut over and over again. I could hear her laughing too, which really started to agitate me. Eventually, I sent her a text message asking her politely to keep the noise down, as I had an early class the next day. She responded with a text message immediately, and her response sent a shiver down my spine. To find out what happened next in this terrifying story, watch this video until the end. I'm your host, Severed Soul. I attended a college with a long history of paranormal activity. In one of the old dorms, there's a suite that's completely blocked off. This suite is supposedly haunted, and the only way that you can break into it is via the suite next door. Ironically, this suite is a designated party room. Rumour has it that a former student ended their life in that room approximately 30 years ago, and has haunted it ever since. As time went on, more and more students refused to reside in that room due to the unexplainable level of phenomenon that would occur in there. There had been claims of disembodied voices crying in the night, and students would suffer from depressive and sometimes suicidal thoughts while sleeping in that room. So, eventually, the college just blocked it off. Me, my friend, and a bunch of other people once broke into that suite out of sheer curiosity more than anything else. The whole place was empty as expected, all apart from a single chair which sat directly in the middle of the common room. That chair is said to be there so that the student's spirit has somewhere to sit, so that he won't bother people. Although, other rumours suggest that this was the chair that the student used to hang himself. Unbeknown to me at the time, one of the other guys had bought an OUIJA board, so we used it to try to communicate with the spirit. We didn't receive any definitive answers, although through a series of yes and no questions, it did seem that we were indeed talking to the boy's spirit. As we were coming to the end of the session, the planchette just seemed to be moving quickly between yes and no. Just as we informed the spirit of our intention to end the session, the door violently slammed shut right in front of our eyes. There was absolutely no wind, as the entire place was sealed off. We checked every single room to make sure that the place was empty when we first entered. At that, we all bolted and left the place well alone. Fast forward a few years, I was teaching at a small high school. The building was pretty new and was in relatively good condition. My classroom was fine, and there was no spooky or paranormal vibes in there at all. Well, for the first few months at least. I bought in 2 portraits to hang on the wall. One of a male politician, and the other of a female activist. I taught social studies, so I felt that they were relevant to my lessons. I hung them on 2 pieces of metal drilled into the wall, using round hooks. One day, after the school day had finished and all the students had gone home, I was in the classroom, and the portrait of the woman fell to the floor. Over the following weeks, this happened a number of times, and each time it fell, I made sure that it was fixed securely to the wall. I even tried pulling downwards on it and knocking it to see if it fell down easily, which it didn't. I had carpeted floors, so it wasn't damaged. It was just annoying and creepy. My co-workers started joking that a sexist ghost was haunting my room. None of the windows on this floor could be opened, so I couldn't even blame it on the wind. And when the portrait fell, I was in the room with the door closed, so I literally had no explanation. One day, as usual, I was in the classroom on my own marking some work, and the portrait fell. But I most certainly was not in the mood. I cursed out loud at whatever was causing the portrait to fall. At this point, I didn't actually believe that there was a ghost haunting the room. I just yelled into the void out of sheer frustration. Eventually, I just decided to remove both of the portraits as I just had enough. After that, however, the focus seemed to shift to something else. The clock that I had up on the wall in that classroom for some time suddenly started falling down multiple times per week. The clock had never ever fallen down before, and was only ever taken down from the wall when the batteries needed replacing. Now, I was starting to believe that there might just be a paranormal explanation for what was going on. Finally, once again, I was in the classroom on my own after the school day had finished. I was just preparing lessons for the following day when I was disturbed by the sound of knocking on the classroom door. I shouted, "Come in," expecting my colleague to enter, but there was no response. Thinking maybe they hadn't heard me, I repeated myself louder, "Come in." At which point, the classroom door slowly started creeping open on its own, but there was nobody there. I got up, walked out into the corridor and called out. There was definitely nobody there. There's CCTV everywhere in that school, so I went straight to the janitor's office and asked to see the CCTV footage. And there it was, clear as day. We could see the handle of that classroom door turning on its own before the door slowly crept open. Needless to say, we were absolutely gobsmacked. One day, a fellow teacher who was in one of the rooms next to mine called me into her room for a chat. We ended up on the subject of paranormal experiences in the school, and she said she believed that both of our rooms were haunted. She too had experienced things falling and moving around the room on their own. The teacher, who was in my room before me, constantly complained about an uneasy feeling and found any excuse not to be in that room alone. I later found out that that school used to be used as an orphanage. I'm not sure if this is an explanation for the hauntings, but something in those rooms is definitely seeking attention. Thankfully, the following term I was moved to a classroom on the other side of the school, and I haven't had any ghostly experiences since moving. Back in the 1980s, I lived with some roommates who had a fascination with OUIJA boards. Eventually, shit got so scary that I had to leave. I had 3 roommates who started using the board. Initially, it didn't work much, but they kept trying until they got a decent response. Before long, fascination turned into addiction, and they were using the board all the time. On Friday night, the whole thing came to a terrifying climax. What happened that night changed me from an absolute skeptic to a definite believer in the paranormal. I worked until 11 PM and got home slightly later than usual that night. The planchette seemed to be flying around the board as if it was possessed. When I walked into the room, everyone was excitedly talking about a little girl who had come through on the board. Apparently, the girl had passed away in the 1920s. Whatever. I wasn't a believer, so I went to my room and turned on the TV. I could still hear them all speaking loudly, when all of a sudden the mood in that room seemed to change. The excitement soon dissipated and was replaced by an air of uncertainty and apprehension. It appeared that the young girl had now stopped communicating, and a different spirit had taken control of the board. Out of sheer curiosity, I came out of my room to see what was going on. The spirit kept alternating between the letters C and Z, so my friends decided to call it Chaz. This was around 86 or 87, so my friends started to speculate that maybe this was Zozo. I had no idea who or what Zozo was, so just for context, Zozo or Zaza is an Ouija board demon who manifests with the sole purpose of driving his victims insane before killing them. One of my friends started taunting the spirit, saying if it was such a powerful entity, why couldn't it do anything away from the board? The room grew quiet, but nothing happened. Well, for a while at least. The energy in the room did seem to shift though. I can't really explain it. It just felt ominous. My friends discussed ending the session and saying goodbye to Chaz. But Chaz had different ideas. The Christmas lights that were hung around the ceiling started blinking. Bear in mind, this was the 1980s, so we didn't have fairy lights with remotes. These were white lights on a dark green wire, and they only blinked if you removed the first bulb on the string. Other than that, they are steady, solid white lights, and nobody ever removed that first bulb to make them blink. They had been hung around the ceiling in that room since September, and they never blinked. And yet, they started blinking, and even as the total skeptic that I was, this shocked the shit out of me. Then, I noticed that one of my friends was fixated on something. He was pointing towards a small side table that we had in that room. She had a look of absolute terror on her face, and we all stopped and noticed exactly what she was looking at. This huge, heavy glass ashtray that one of my friends had stolen from a hotel in New Hampshire was vibrating on that table. Soon, the vibrating intensified, and the ashtray started rocking backwards and forwards on that table before sliding towards my friends. Without warning, before our very eyes, the ashtray launched itself at the wall right next to me, smashing into 3 pieces on the floor. Everyone totally flipped out, and I'm not going to lie, that includes me too. We quickly turned on the lights, blew the candles out, and brought the session to an end. Shortly after this, maybe a week or 2 later, my roommate went to stay with her boyfriend for the weekend. As usual, I finished work at 11 PM, and I was hit with a really uneasy feeling as I walked into our shared bedroom. I really felt like I was being watched, so I turned on the TV to ease my anxiety. I left the TV on, but turned the volume right down before I fell asleep, and I placed the remote control on the bedside table next to me. I closed my eyes, and before long, I had drifted off to sleep. At some point in the night, I was woken up abruptly by a crashing sound, and the volume on that TV had been turned right up. Shocked and in a daze, I looked around the room and noticed that the remote control was now in pieces on the floor on the other side of the room. Batteries were on the floor next to it. Needless to say, I was absolutely petrified, and I moved out of that room that night. I went to stay with some other friends until the end of semester. This experience has totally altered my perception of the supernatural. I just sincerely hope that I never encounter anything like this again. Have you ever had an experience with an Ouija board? I have experienced many paranormal encounters in my life, but this story is from my time in college and it spanned over a year. One particular night, I was on FaceTime with my now former roommate while we were all home for the holidays. They were complaining that they could hear some weird noises coming from the attic, and they decided to investigate. This is despite me, who has always lived in a haunted house, strongly advising them not to. But she decided to investigate anyway. With me still on FaceTime, she climbed the steps to the attic, opened the hatch, and flicked on the light switch. It was difficult for me to gauge exactly what was going on. Even with the light on, it was still very dim. I was still strongly advising her to leave it alone and go back downstairs, but, against my better judgment, she persisted. What happened next in that attic was absolutely horrifying. But first, I want to fast forward to a few days later when we were in our apartment. My partner, who was living with us at the time, started complaining about hearing our voices calling out to him while he showered. Initially, I just thought he was messing with us. However, before long I started hearing it too, but with my roommate's voice only. Late one night, I could clearly hear my roommate's closet door opening and slamming shut over and over again. I could hear her laughing too, which really started to agitate me. Eventually, I sent her a text message, asking her politely to keep the noise down, as I had a class early the next day. She sent me a text back immediately, and her response sent a shiver down my spine. She sent me a Snapchat of her at work. She wasn't in her room. My partner was also at work, so at this moment I realised I was in the apartment alone. We didn't have any neighbours. The rooms next to us were vacant, and the new tenants weren't moving in for a few weeks. So, nervously and apprehensively, I slowly crept down the hallway towards her room. At this point, the banging and the laughter had both stopped. It really felt like something was waiting for me on the other side of that door. I slowly turned the handle and pushed the door open. I'm not sure exactly what I was expecting, but my heart was going 10 to the dozen. To my surprise, the room was exactly as she'd left it. Trying not to pry too much, I had a quick look around and opened her closet door. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, so I made a sigh of relief, thinking maybe it was all in my head. Boy, was I wrong. I closed the closet door, turned around, and made my way back out of the room. And that is when I heard it. Laughter. My blood ran cold as I slowly turned around to face her room. The closet door that I had literally just closed was now open again. Make no mistake, I bolted straight back to my room and barricaded myself in. Fortunately, there was no more activity that night, but that didn't stop me from sleeping with the light on. COVID hit soon after, and my roommate couldn't justify staying in the apartment when the lease came to an end, especially since the rest of the school was closed for the foreseeable future due to the pandemic. She moved back to her parents, while me and my partner searched for a new place because neither of us wanted to move back in with our parents. We found a place pretty quickly and moved in. It was slightly smaller than our last place, but it was nice. However, before long, I started suffering from sleep paralysis and the voices returned. I was still hearing my former roommate's voice whenever I showered, and now I was hearing my partner's voice too. It wasn't faint, it was clear and deliberate, and it scared the absolute shit out of me. My partner mentioned the same thing. We were having similar encounters with each other's voices. On one occasion, I heard the bathroom door unlock, open and shut, followed by the sound of my partner saying my name. I asked him what he wanted, but he didn't respond. I peeked around the shower curtain only to see that the door was still closed and locked. We suffered many sleepless nights together in that apartment, but thankfully we weren't there for much longer. We terminated the lease agreement with the landlord because he failed to tell us that there was a loud rooftop bar which shared a wall with us. He offered us a coupon to the bar, which we abruptly declined. We terminated the lease on the grounds of breach of trust on their end, legally allowing us to move out without penalty. My partner's parents allowed us to move into their lake house while we searched for a new place. It was convenient for us because it was close to where I worked and it was close enough to the school. But before long, again, we were both hearing voices whenever we were alone. I remember one night I was abruptly woken up in the middle of the night by the sound of banging behind our headboard. I could also hear a loud voice yelling at us to wake up. Initially, I thought it was my partner's mother, as the voice sounded very similar to hers. My partner jumped up and went to investigate, but there was nobody there. I started receiving text messages from my former roommate saying that she was constantly seeing and hearing things, and she was apologising for not listening to me when I told her not to go into that attic. Which brings me back to that night. She was rummaging around in the attic for a few minutes when she came across a dusty old box. She opened the box and described it to me as a board game with a series of letters and numbers. She had no idea what it was, but I knew instantly that this was an OUIJA board. I immediately told her to put it back in the box and leave it the hell alone, and for once she actually listened to me. As she put the box back where she found it, she said that she could hear something from over by the hatch in the attic. She stopped moving and fell silent as we both listened intently. I could hear it too. It was a voice, and it was saying, "I told you not to go up there, but you wouldn't listen." But this voice was instantly recognisable. It was my voice, and with that, the hatch to the attic slammed shut. I stayed on the call with her, as she eventually worked up the courage to open the hatch and descend the steps. Thankfully, the rest of that night was uneventful. Me and my boyfriend soon found a new apartment and moved out of the lake house. My ex-roommate had her home blessed, and her parents cleared out the attic. They sent the OUIJA board to an antiques dealer that specialises in paranormal artifacts. Thankfully, all of the paranormal activity came to an end for all of us. As I mentioned, I've had many paranormal experiences and encounters growing up. But that year was, without doubt, the most terrifying year of my life. That wraps things up for today. I really hope those stories give you nightmares. As always, leave your thoughts in the comments section. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for a feast of grim and grisly content. Thanks for watching. I'm your host, Severed Soul.